Hello, my lovely dark readers, and welcome back to The Dark Spine, our little shadowy corner of the internet where we explore everything eerie, unsettling, and sometimes downright grotesque. Today, we're going into the belly of the beast, a haunted house story, but not just any haunted house story. This is Hell House by Richard Matheson. And I'll just say it up front. On Fable, I gave this book a glowing 5 stars. Why? Well, let's just say, sometimes you find a horror novel that doesn't just creep you out, it crawls inside your head and festers there. And this was one of those reads. For those who might not know, Richard Matheson is a name that carries serious weight in horror and speculative fiction circles. He's the mind behind I Am Legend, The Shrinking Man, and countless short stories that have been adapted for the Twilight Zone. But Hell House, published in 1971, is his answer to the haunted house genre. Now, you might think, haunted houses, haven't we seen it all before? And you'd be right. Now. But in 1971, this was shocking, disturbing, utterly filthy in a way horror rarely dared to be. Reading it in 2025, I could appreciate how much of a gut punch it must have been for readers back then. But here's the thing, I've seen it all before. And that's not Matheson's fault. It's because so many horror writers and filmmakers who came after him, including some of the biggest names in the genre, have been directly influenced by him. Reading Hell House today feels like looking at the blueprint for 1,000 horror novels and films that came after. The setup: a group of people go into the most haunted house in the world to investigate, each with their own reasons, their own baggage, and their own demons. Sound familiar? It should. You've seen versions of it in The Haunting of Hill House, Rose Red, The Conjuring, House on Haunted Hill, the list goes on. But Matheson's take is meaner, more depraved. This isn't just a house with a few creaks and groans. It's a place steeped in violence, corruption, and degradation. And Matheson doesn't shy away from showing you exactly what that looks like. That said, some parts are very much of their time. This was written in the early 70s, and you can feel it in certain attitudes, in the way some characters are described, in the casual use of stereotypes, and in the portrayal of women and sexuality. None of it was enough to ruin the experience for me, but I clocked it. It's one of those things you learn to navigate as a modern reader when revisiting old horror. You mentally adjust for the era while still appreciating what the author was trying to achieve back then. And honestly, in a way, it made me admire it more because Matheson was pushing boundaries for his time. What feels tame-ish now was jaw-dropping back then. Now let's talk about something I found fascinating. I couldn't help but notice just how much Matheson's writing style reminded me of Stephen King's. Both of them have this uncanny ability to describe something so vividly, so viscerally, that you actually feel it in your body. There were descriptions in Hell House that made my stomach turn, and I loved that. It's the sensory detail, the sticky, the rotten, the crawling on your skin kind of imagery that pulls you deeper into the horror. And it's clear King learned from Matheson. He's even said in interviews that Matheson was one of his biggest influences. And you can see it in the way they both balance human drama with supernatural terror and their knack for making the unbelievable feel plausible. The version of Hell House I read had a direct quote from Stephen King on the cover of the book that said that Hell House is the scariest haunted house story ever written. When Matheson describes the decaying grandeur of the Belasco house, you can almost smell it. When King describes, say, the Overlook Hotel's sinister ballroom in The Shining, you feel that same creeping dread. It's a direct literary lineage, and I found myself grinning every time I spotted a similarity. I will say grinning through my retching. And I have to say, the vividness of the descriptions in Hell House was one of my favourite aspects. Matheson paints every detail: the rotting wood, the warped shadows, the cold spots, the grotesque remnants of the house's history, that chapel, with his almost cinematic clarity. And those details don't just decorate the horror, they are the horror. When he describes a room, you're not just seeing it, you're experiencing it. Your brain starts filling in the smells, the sounds, the tactile sensations you don't want to imagine but just can't help conjuring. That's the power of good horror writing. It makes you complicit. Now let's talk about the characters, because this is another area where Matheson's influence shows. We've got a classic horror lineup. The scientist, approaching it all with cold logic and lots of technology. The medium, deeply attuned to the supernatural. The skeptic, who's along for the ride but refuses to believe. And the one who's been here before, carrying trauma from the last encounter. It's a recipe for tension, not just between humans and the house, but between each other. The interpersonal conflicts are almost as gripping as the supernatural ones. Watching rationality break down, watching alliances shift and paranoia creep in, oof, it's delicious. Now, did Hell House scare me? Not in the I can't sleep way, but it definitely did make me squirm. It's not the jump scares, because there's really not that many of them. It's the sustained atmosphere of wrongness. The house feels alive, but in the worst way possible. And Matheson doesn't just tell you it's evil, he shows you over and over in ways that are both subtle and in your face. And here's where I think horror fans will really appreciate it. It's unflinching. It doesn't cut away from the disturbing moments. If something horrific happens, you get the full sensory detail. And for me, that adds to the scare factor. When I finished Hell House, I sat there for a moment thinking about how different my experience would have been if I'd have read it in 1971. Back then, so much of what's in this book would have been groundbreaking. The explicitness, the psychological cruelty, the blending of science and the supernatural, the sexual references and scenes. But in 2025, I've been marinating in decades of horror books and films that borrowed from this template, and yet it still worked. It didn't matter that I'd seen it all before, because I was seeing it here at the source. So let's sum it up. Hell House is essential horror reading, not just because it's a great story, but because it's a cornerstone of the genre. Yes, some elements are dated. Yes, as a modern horror fan, you'll recognise a lot of the beats. But that's the point. This is where those beats came from. And when it comes to atmosphere and description and sheer commitment to the grotesque, Matheson definitely delivers. He made me gag, he made me wince, and I thoroughly enjoyed every second of it. That's why it got a solid 5 stars from me on Fable. If you love haunted house stories, if you love horror that pushes boundaries, if you want to trace the lineage from Matheson to King to the horror of today, you need to read this book. So, my dark readers, have you already read Hell House? Did it get under your skin? Or are you one of those readers who's still saving it for the perfect spooky season read? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to compare notes. And if you enjoyed this review, please give it a like, Subscribe to The Dark Spine for more deep dives into the eerie and the unsettling, and ring that bell so you don't miss my next descent into darkness. Until next time, keep your tea dark, your books darker, and your spine, well, you know. I'm Sarah, this is The Dark Spine, and I'll see you in the next one.